right. Ayden, what's up, man?
Yeah, not much. Just getting ready to go into the shop. So yeah.
Beautiful. I'm fired up. So thanks you're my second guest on the Sheet Metal Shaping podcast. So on the show, we typically talk about, coach building and all the techniques related to the industry, and you're a pro. So tell the folks at home a little bit about yourself and about Bespoke.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'm Ayden, 31. So fairly sort of young. Run Bespoke Coach Works here in Australia, in Canberra, and yeah, we just focus on sort of high end sort of coach building, custom car building. And we really focus on doing like the full build. I don't like to sort of take on sort of smaller projects. It's mainly, start to finish type stuff. So, yeah.
I love it. I love it. How long have you been doing this?
So I've been in the industry I started my apprenticeship in 2009 in just smash repair. So I've done 3.5 years or something in crash repair, smash repair. And then I moved on into the custom industry. I was in there for about 4 years, and then I sort of had enough for a bit. So I was actually out for 3 years. So then coming back into it, I probably maybe had 7 or 8 years sort of like custom, like in the sheet metal sort of side of things. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you branched into doing your own business at that point, or were you still apprenticing under somebody else?
No. So I was still like just working for other shops. And then I started the shop. I started Bespoke. It was the start of our second COVID lockdown. So it would have been September 21, I think. So it was actually my 30th birthday, the day that I started the shop. So yeah.
That's very good. Where do you think the industry's come from to get us to today? Like from like horse and buggy era to today, custom coach works, when that was the only thing that you could do, to build cars, up to current modern times. Like, what does this mean and where have we come from?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm trying to think of how to sort of put that. Yeah, I think we've had like a real sort of evolution. I think we're sort of, we started like say in the 30s, 40s, like sort of pre-war era. I think there was such a, like the craft was probably at its absolute peak at it, like, that's when all those like crazy sort of designs and things like that were happening. And then I guess we started to move, obviously war times happened, and we move into like sort of more into the manufacturing processes and things like that. And I think the skill really sort of kind of disappeared a lot. And then it's not until like maybe the last sort of, I wouldn't say maybe 7 or 8 years, 6 years maybe, that I feel like it's really started to come back. I think social media has helped that so much with, like Instagram especially. You got to credit so much for, and I guess Facebook groups as well. But being able to connect fabricators, craftsmen all over the world, it's now opened up, the knowledge base as well as just the community aspect of it all. And I think it's really made its resurgence. You can look at what someone else is doing and go and try that yourself, where before, if you didn't have any social media, you were just stuck in your own little hole and you had no idea what, it was only what you had access to personally that you'd be able to see. Yeah. So now you can see so much more. It really opens everything up.
Yeah. Do you find that you're taking tips from, YouTube University, as some people call it here in Canada? Do you find you're taking tips from there, or you're more the person giving advice out?
When I first started, most definitely. I'm self-taught, so everything was just YouTube, reading books, anything I could possibly, just looking at photos, like just trying to analyze what was actually happening. I think now I definitely do I still go on YouTube, and I follow Carl, and I follow, Christopher Runge and Rachel Lee and things like that, Mike Wagner. And it's more, you're still picking things up. It's not heaps that you're picking up, but you're still just watching just to see something different. You might know how to do something a particular way, but it's just another perspective, and you might go, oh, I might be able to, tweak a little bit of what I really like it, how I do this part of it. But if I just tweak a little bit, it might help. So it's always good to, watch what other people are doing to open yourself up, because, every day is a school day. So yeah.
That's true. Mike Wagner was actually on the show recently.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. I said, yeah, is there anybody else that I should get on the show? And he goes, oh my gosh, you got to get Ayden on. He's fantastic. So I'm glad you're here.
Yeah. No, I speak to Mike every couple of weeks, where, we're going back and forth on Instagram. Hopefully one day I can, get over there and meet him. That's sort of like what happened with Carl. I've been speaking with Carl for years, and then, we finally got to hang out. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. For the folks that are listening, Carl is Japan's Customs. So he's got a
Yes, yeah,
YouTube
sorry,
channel as
yeah,
well. And
yeah.
he recently spent some time over at your place.
Yeah. He come over for a month with Heron Forbes, which is like a company that I partner with here in Australia, and
Mhm.
yeah, we got to spend 3 or 4 weekends together. He come down to the shop, spend a couple of days, sort of stayed at my house, so we just got to hang out and you know, yeah, do some stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about the shop. So, how does somebody who's new to the industry differentiate this between doing it as a hobby versus somebody like yourself who's doing it professionally as a business? What is the difference?
Um, well, the in terms of the craft, there is no real difference except for maybe the extent that we take it. Where a hobbyist, I think a hobbyist is probably focusing more on how much time do I have on the weekend, or my Tuesday night, which is what their wife allows me to have off or whatever to try and get their specific task done. So they might try and do things a little bit faster, etc. But in terms of the actual process, it's not a whole lot different. We're just taking it further. Obviously, we're doing it we're using a customer's budget, not our budget, things like that. But in terms, yeah, the only real difference is like the extent, and obviously, where you may be doing, say, like a bigger panel or something like that. So that's where our skills evolve, and especially doing it so much more, our skills go further and further. But what we're doing really isn't rocket science. It's really just shrinking and stretching and bending, and that's how we're creating shapes and panels. We just know where to put the particular things in the right area. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about skills of actually building. It's a good segue. So let's talk about skills of building a panel. If you're going to take, we'll say like a 1930s, like a 1930 early Ford front fender, let's say
Yep.
conventional shape. A lot of these cars have a very similar fender profile.
Yeah, for
If you're
sure.
going to look at this fender and you're going to say, it's going to be made out of steel, probably aluminum, something like that. If you're going to go historic, maybe it's steel. If you're going to remake it, maybe
Yeah.
it's aluminum. How would you go about sizing that panel up to say, this is how I'm going to build it?
So typically, I would. Depends on how far. Say if it was say it was a rear guard, just because I know how far around they come. Say to their
Okay.
bedside, you'd break it up into. I mean, personally, for me, I would break it up into probably 3 pieces or 2 pieces, depending on how far it comes around. Maybe 2 pieces plus the flange. So I would sort
Mhm.
of split it down the middle of the wheel arch, and yeah, and then obviously just move straight into a paper pattern. But my paper pattern would obviously determine my piece size, and so I would sort of like first up, I sort of look at the panel and go, yeah, I think it's going to be 2, and then I might lay the paper over there and sort of see how much. I guess it's like almost a preliminary, can't even say the word, preliminary. An initial paper pattern, right? So then I'll look at the
Yeah.
paper. I'll put the paper on, and I'll pull a little bit of like a bit of material over and go. Oh, the shrinks are not going to go far. Like I think the shrinks are going to be too large, so I might break the pattern down a little bit more, etc. Or you might look at it and go, oh no, I can shrink 300 mil. That will be totally fine. So I'll start off with
Right.
an initial paper pattern, like just to sort of throw it over and go, yeah, no, that's going to be all right. So then you split it up, say it's 2 pieces. I've done a similar guard like into. Yeah, so you just move straight into your paper pattern. Obviously, there's a lot of different methods out there. People using tape, like the flexible shape pattern, or people just using a tape pattern. I'm a big fan of just a standard paper pattern. I think putting that information down on the pattern, on your panel, understanding where your shrink's going to be. I think it's really important, because like you can put a bit of paper on there and you can really cheat yourself. Like you could, if you put the paper down and you laid it on top of the radius, like the top of the, not the flatter, like vertical section, the more horizontal section. If you start with
Mhm.
your paper there, you can sort of cheat yourself and say that all the shrinking needs to happen on the front face, which it just doesn't, because that's not, you just got to understand the metal and you know that that's not where it needs to shrink. So, um, yeah, I really like just the standard paper pattern, understanding where your shrinking needs to go. It gives you your piece size, and it just takes all the guesswork out of it. You don't have to. Yeah, you just don't make as many mistakes when you when you know where things need to go. It's like when you go for a drive and you've never been there before. If you have no GPS or no map, you're going to struggle getting to where you're going. But if you have and really too, if you had a map and the map was missing like half the amount of roads, well, you're going to struggle getting to where you need to go. But if you have a GPS that's like, it's bang on exactly where your car is, it's real time, you're going to know where you got to turn. You know what I mean? The better your GPS, the better your destined, you easier you're going to get to your destination. That's, yeah.
Sure. When you're doing the paper and when you're laying it on there and you're seeing these creases and you're reading it, how do you know that you're getting close? Because the paper doesn't necessarily fit exactly when you've made your new one. How do you know that you're getting close to the same profile and the same area, arrangement, shape, all of this? How do you know that you're getting close?
I guess you'd be running. So if you had a car, say it's rusted, like the panel is quite rusted and you need to replicate it, you're going to have to take some form of template. Like if you don't have a buck to work on, you need some form of template, be it a buck, a wire form, something. So you could make a wire form off the inner part of the guard. That's what I've done in the past. Just a quick, 6 or 8 millimeter wire, get the radiuses and get the shape. So then you can just fit to that, or you can just make some cardboard female templates on the outside, have them incrementally along, similar to what you would a buck station. So that's really the best way. You got to work off something, right? Otherwise you're just flying in the dark.
Yeah. I think Rachel talks about the flexible shape pattern a lot, which is a really interesting system. Have you used this in the
Yes,
past?
I have used it in the past. Yeah, I did. I have used it for a car before, and it definitely does work. It's not my go-to. Maybe I just haven't used it enough to really sort of like get the massive benefit of it. But I don't know. I just sort of I kind of would rather I guess use like my feel and sort of my visual acuity, like sort of seeing what is going on and feeling what is going on and understanding, because I think if I rely on the pattern too much, it's, you're kind of not learning. Like you got to understand, like you're just putting the pattern on and going, yeah, it's not working until the pattern fits. Yeah, you're getting the panel made, but are you getting the benefit of, really understanding what's happening? So I would prefer to, troubleshoot in the terms of it's not fitting here, or like looking at the panel. Oh, there's a low spot. The panel's sweeping the wrong direction, or that sweep is not enough, or, yeah, I would. That's how I personally would prefer to do it. I'm sure the flexible shape pattern is an amazing process. It seems it, and I've used it before, and it is great. But I just prefer to do it with the touch and feel, so you get a real understanding. Because if you get put in that situation, you don't have the Gorilla Tape or whatever, what are you going to do? You've got to know how to do it. So I would rather get the skills first. Yeah.
How long would it typically take you to make a rear fender or a rear guard, as you say, knowing what you know now versus what a beginner might be able to do?
Something like that. I think I can do. I think I done the 40, so I done one for a 40 GMC, so very similar shape, and I think it was about maybe 3 days, 2.5 days, roughly. So about a day. Yeah, yeah. You say you have shrinking. You do most of your shrinking, say like in the first part of the day, and then you're sort of wheeling, smoothing. So like each half, I guess, would be 1 day each, and then that you've got a sort of a day in adjusting the two panels together, welding them, flanging, stuff like that. So yeah, you probably maybe 3 days roughly. Yeah.
So would that be like 20 hours, 30 hours, somewhere in there?
Yeah,
How
I would
long's your
say
day?
between 20 to 30. Yeah, exactly. I would say about 20
Yeah.
to 30. Yeah. Yeah.
Right on. Would something like that include maybe a wire edge or include some reverse curve if it kind of whale tails off, or not so much?
Well, it depends on what the car needs, but yeah, typical sort of flange, on the wheel arch, maybe a flange on the backside to where you bolt it up to the bedside. Yeah.
Yeah, right on. What about for a front fender? If you took the same process and said, okay, let's repeat this for a front fender, knowing that they're bigger and possibly more
Yeah.
pieces and so on, how would you size up a front fender of that same vintage?
Yeah, so front fender, a little bit different, but not really. So the outer, like sort of usually, I guess with a front fender like that, you're going to have your outer radius, and then it's going to reverse back. It'll have a small reverse or something going back into the hood side. So and I'm actually doing one right now on the Rolls Royce, so it's a pretty good indication. So I would break it down exactly the same way. So the front piece sort of main shrinking area, the rear piece sort of, it will probably have like I guess it will have a shrink and a reverse curve. So like it will have the shrinking up the front part and then the reverse sort of down the back of I guess the vertical section of the wheel arch. So I'd do the back two pieces again, and then I'd break it further forward. And then obviously it depends on how big the guard is, how far does it go down. But
Yeah.
you're going to break it down a lot more. But I'd still do like the main sort of compound curve in the two pieces like I did the rear, and then break it down further for the next sort of back half of the radius and the reverse curve sort of into the hood side. So it'd be 3 or 4. It just sort of depends on the particular car and how big it is. It's kind of tough not being with it. So like the Rolls Royce I'm doing at the moment, it's going to have a running board included, but it's probably going to be 9 or 10 pieces by the time it's done. But it's also like 3.5 meters long, so it's a massive piece.
Yeah.
But it really just comes down to how complex it is.
Do you prefer to work in bigger pieces or smaller pieces with more finishing?
I would prefer. It's a tough one. It really depends on the piece. I would try and go a little bit bigger, less finishing, just because I hate it.
Yep.
Like I hate the whole finishing part of it. But I don't go too big where it's just stupid. Like I would still rather break it down and do a join. But it's all about how manageable it is. But I guess, I don't know. I've been told that my piece sizes, people try and say that my piece sizes are a little bit on the bigger side. I don't find them too big. So if it was, but then also too, steel, aluminium, different. Aluminium, but you can do a little bit bigger piece because your body's not wearing out trying to hold all the weight. So that's a factor as well. Yeah.
That's interesting. You can't look at any one particular thing in isolation. It's like the whole assembly. How is this completely working? Not just like one little part of it, right?
Yeah, really, because like a steel, like the Rolls Royce is going to have like a 3.5 meter long guard. That in steel, you can pick it up. In aluminium, you can pick it up with one hand. With steel, you probably need 2 guys to lift it. Like it's so much heavier. Like you pick up a full steel sheet 0.95 and lift it up. It's like heavy to lift. But then aluminium, you can pick it up with one hand. So it's very different. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned in one of your recent YouTube videos that I saw, you talked about fixing a loose edge. So like if we went really granular and we're talking about something very technical, a loose edge can come from a couple different ways, but you had talked about wheeling inboard or hammering inboard to fix this loose edge. Can you quantify what that means?
Yeah, so that would have been on one of the radius. It's very typical. So we teach a class up in Sydney, and that in that class we teach pulling out, like shrinking a radius. So like just a very typical sort of shrinking out of form, and then sort of wheeling to smooth. And so you do all this shrinking on the top edge, and then you have your vertical face, and your vertical face always gets floppy. Right, it's really wobbly and it's pop. The panel has a lot of pop in it, and initially everyone thinks, "Oh, this edge is all wavy. I need to shrink." Like that must be what's happening because I've got too much material. I can see the material popping. Where I always tell the student, "It's why do you need to shrink that panel?" And they go, "Oh, because it's all wobbly." I said, "But what have you done?" And they're like, "Well, we haven't done anything to that part of the panel." I was like, "Well, how is it stretched?" You haven't stretched the material there. What it all is you've just pulled tension into the material from all that shrinking that's rolled it around. So if you go and shrink that bottom edge, you're going to do the same thing as what you've done on the top, and you're just going to roll it back around further. If you want that to be flat, you need to do stretching and create more material, inbound at the edge. So that's all that really is. So I don't know how I come across it. It must have just been through practice. But all it is just when you have a loose edge, you really just got to really analyze, what have I done? Sometimes you might have a loose edge because you have stretched that edge too much. Like that could just be the reality. But really, you got to analyze your panel and go, okay, what have I done to it? I've done a whole bunch of shrinking here. I've done a little bit of linear stretch up the top. But this front face, I haven't touched it. So you're not going to go in and you're not going to shrink when you haven't stretched. That's
true.
I hope that answers the question.
Is there a favorite tool? And is there a favorite tool in your opinion that you prefer? If we jump into like the tools, start talking, tool talk. What type of tools do you prefer to use in your shop, and why is that? Shrinking, stretching, and so on.
So in terms of brand or just machine in general?
in terms of machine? Like, are you an English wheel guy? Are you a power hammer guy? There seems to be a great divide out there between the two
Yeah.
subsets.
Well, I'll split it right down the middle. I like both. So
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not one or the other. I like the power hammer is great. It's very so like I like the power hammer for my shrinking, linear stretching, and I guess even for doing some like low crown things, it's definitely fine. I do prefer working on aluminium. I prefer the English wheel just because of the shine, like what it does to the panel. Like it gives you that glossy, like real bright finish where you're not going to
hmm
necessarily get that with a power hammer. Um, uh, and I feel very comfortable with finishing on a wheel. So you will usually do um, most of my work will be power hammer, sort of shrinking, linear stretching, and I might even go to sandbag to sort of beat areas out. And then it is that my panel's just about there, and then all it is very light pressure on the wheel to finish. So I don't like to wind up heaps of tension on the wheel and really sort of stretch it out. I prefer just to get the panel as close as possible. Like sort of, I guess I don't like the term roughed in because I don't think anything we do is rough. But you try and get the panel. It's got its walnuts in it. It's got its shrinking. It's got its linear stretching, and your panel's good. And then it fits the car, and then you just go in and you just wheel just to finish, really. And I think you'll see that in a lot of my videos. I don't go too much like sort of back and forth. Every now and then you might have to go back and forth between, you haven't shrunk enough and you go back in, but usually you try and get what you need to get done, move to the wheel, and then you're sort of finished.
yeah.
Yeah.
Any preference in terms of like why you're choosing one tool or the other in terms of overall quality when the panel's completed?
In terms of like between a power hammer and a wheel. Yeah,
That's
like
right.
it just comes down to the material. Like if I was doing a steel panel, it's possible that I might go all power hammer.
Yeah.
And it could be, to be honest, it could just be just how I feel in the day. Like sometimes, like I love the wheel because it's nice and quiet. Like I like putting the podcast on or something and just you're
Mhm.
just there in silence. Where the hammer is obviously it's loud and it's hard to hear your podcast and all that sort of stuff. I would rather just I just like the dance that the English wheel is. I think a lot of power hammer guys are going to hate me for saying it, but I think that there's more skill involved to be a master on a wheel than what there is with the power hammer. I think the power hammer you can pick it up very quickly, and don't get me wrong, there's immense talent in that. But I think to be like a master on the wheel, and I don't consider myself that at all, but to be really good on the English wheel, I think there is a higher skill involved. Just because it's a different way, like the way you're moving, and you got to be able to manipulate through these things. Like with a power hammer, you can put a radius on the top, you can put a radius on the bottom to get through reverse curves, etc. But for
Yeah.
an English wheel, you got a flat top. You've got to be able to understand how to wheel through that. Using higher crowns on the bottom, so you got a little bit of rock in your panel, all that sort of thing. I think there's a real immense skill involved in being good on the wheel. So I really enjoy the English wheel personally. Yeah.
Hmm. You mentioned something interesting there about the reverse curve. What are some of the challenges that your students are facing when you run classes with something like a reverse curve? Why are those more challenging than other panels?
Um, well, we try not to teach reverse curves too much until they get the process, like understanding, how to do a compound, because the compound curves is definitely easier to do, even though the process is the same.
Mhm.
It is definitely easier to do a compound curve. So we try and stay away from reverse curves until they're like really competent, like a more advanced sort of class. And they would have to sort of do more of the basic classes first to get an understanding. But in terms of reverses, I don't know. They're just. I think it's just because you're thinking differently. Like, really, I don't think they are. Like, personally, I don't find them that much more difficult because all you're doing is instead of shrinking an edge, you're stretching an edge. I think the difficulty comes with, especially because most people, especially here in Australia, is that they are English wheel. Because we never got Penningels and Yodas and stuff like that over here, and then and even to get like the Bailey equipment, it's so expensive that the power
Mm,
hammers, it's just not a viable option here in Australia.
right.
Most people have an English wheel. Like it's just you can get one, even just the real cheap ones. You can pick one up for a couple $100, and you can do a thing on them. So the English wheel is quite popular here in Australia, and I think they're definitely harder to wheel a reverse curve especially when they start to get quite tight and complex. And I think that's the hard part for them is just trying to manipulate, how to manipulate a panel through a reverse. Like sometimes, a lot of the time, it's got to be done upside down and things like that. So, yeah,
It's a brain buster.
it is.
Like,
It can be,
how
in
am I gonna do
short.
this?
Yeah, yeah. Until that like unlocks. Like once you, I guess once you really get the hang of a reverse curve and it just like something just clicks and you go, oh, it's nothing now. And for me personally, I put reverses. Like a lot of my design work has reverse curves in it.
They're
Like
beautiful, right?
I put reverse
They're so
curves in
pretty.
everything. They're so lovely. Like they're nicer than a compound curve. But I love a good transition more than anything. Being able to put a compound into a reverse, and like all these like reverses sweeping different directions. I think they're great. So and it really lends to that 30s style that a lot of the stuff that I do is. So I reckon they're great.
Yeah. Do you find yourself looking at vehicles differently? Like maybe when you were a kid, you were looking at them differently as when you are now. Maybe when you were a kid, it was it was just four wheels and it looks cool. And now you're like, wow, look at this design. This is incredible. It
Yeah.
inspires me. Do you see it differently? Yeah.
100%. Yeah, no, I'm always looking. I just look at cars in general. So like, I'm not even. I used to be like when I was a kid, it was all like sort of, GM or Ford. Like you were one or the other, and I was like real heavily GM. But as I gotten older, it's just like I don't even care. I don't even care that it's a car. I just like the metal. I like watching what the what the metal is doing and how it moves. A lot of people, I guess, will have they hate modern car design even. And for me personally, I don't love modern car design, but there's elements of modern car design that I'll just be sitting in traffic and looking at an area on a car and I'll be like, how could I make that? Because like it's so like some of those areas, especially say like around a front guard, how it transitions into the cant rail and onto the door, like that area is so I think it was like a Toyota Camry or something. I was just looking at just yesterday at the lights and I was like, how the hell would I make that? Because that was made with a press, obviously. It's not made by hand. And it's like, that has so much like process of like, you have to stretch that out and then shrink that back in and, all those things. So although modern car design even is kind of like a little bit, but there's still some areas that are so complex. And then I look at that and go, sometimes you might run into you're designing something on an older car and you're like, how can I, pull that shape into, so yeah, I look at design completely different. Like one thing about old car design that I don't like is that although they had very beautiful shapes, because they didn't have very good manufacturing, the processes were very clunky, like they didn't have nice transitions between panels and all that sort of thing, where modern car design has that. So I try to, look at the both and see if I can try and bring them together so you can get like the high end sort of surface finish and transitions in, through lines and things. Because also too, they design this stuff on a computer now, so they can go, oh, this tail light line, can transition into that boot lid line, and then like they use shut lines and parting lines as part of their design, which they didn't do that back in the day. You look at parting lines and stuff, and they're like, why did they do that? But that's probably just because that's what they had available, like all the tools that they had available. So now that we're got more tools, more technology, I try and use that stuff in my design, especially.
Yeah. Do you prefer to work? You talk about like CAD and computer tech. Do you prefer to work from a wood buck that's been CNC routed off of a CAD image, or do you prefer to work off of a wireform where you can clamp to it or weld to it or do what you have to do?
So cars that I've done, like a car that I've just recently, like the Auburn that I've been doing. So with that car, I designed one car of this one side of the car first, and then from then on, like it was just a replication. So I just got the car scanned and then I made it was a CNC buck to finish. The car that I'm currently doing, the rolls, I started with nothing. I sort of done it like a traditional Rolls Royce where we had the grill shell, the chassis and the firewall. And then we just had to come up with a design. So with that, I come up with a wire form. But the wire form was more just to put us in a direction. It wasn't, because sometimes when you do a wire form, especially like just a quick TIG one, like a TIG wire form, it's not always the best surface. It might look good, but it's not always like, when it comes to actually putting it into material, you can bend a bit of wire and make it do whatever you want to, and especially when you've got large gaps between it. But that transitioning part, when you've got a solid piece of material, it might not allow you to, get that crazy bend that you had. So I'll use a wire form just to put me in the area. I know that it's when I paper pattern to it, it's going to give me my stretch and my shrink and all that sort of stuff that I need, but it's going to change slightly just because the material won't be able to do it. So I'm not really married to any sort of idea. I like to play around with a lot of different sort of techniques and things like that to make it work. There's obviously a right way and a wrong way to do things, but I like to play around a bit. Yeah.
Nice. In terms of your actual, like the buck itself or the wire form or whatever you're working to, how close will you typically make a panel fit to that wire form or to that buck? Like when is close enough? When is close perfect? When is it too far out that it still needs more work?
Yeah. So I guess with the so with the Auburn, I tried to get it. You tried to get it as close as you possibly can. I guess you really got to think about time, like, because obviously you're in a workshop, you're charging a customer, things like that. You got to think about how much time. Like, you don't want it to be 10 mil out, where it's visually, and I think that's one of the best things is to look at it. There's right because there's right because it measures, and then there's right because it looks okay, it looks correct. So I think. And how are we going to view the car? Well, you're not going to view it with a measuring tape and a paper pattern or whatever. You're viewing it with your eyes. So it's really about trying to get it as fit as, because obviously if it fits that buck, it's going to look the same. But then if it's a little bit out in a compound curve is grown 3 mil or something, or that reverse curve has lifted 1.5 mil out of where it's supposed to be, are you going to be able to see it? So it really is very situational. Again, certain areas are going to show it more than others. So obviously you're always trying to work for perfection. You're trying to get it as close as possible, but the reality is it just isn't. But then there's also there's a beauty in it not being the same. Like there's a beauty in those old coachbuilt vehicles. Like you look at the Mona Lisa, she's not symmetrical, but yet they call it as one of the most beautiful paintings because of proportions and things like that. So I think Carl was saying it to me. I think it's like wabi-sabi or something like that, and it means perfect imperfection, basically. So it's sort of like. Yeah, that's what I will work to the buck as best I can, and then if it starts to move away, especially because you weld things together, things will slightly move. It doesn't look right. If it looks wrong, well then you've got to try and adjust it. But if you can look at it and you go, oh, I can barely pick it, or things like that, then I think it's just you run with it. It's a coachbuilt. It's made by hands. We're not made, like even two hands, they're different. Like each side of our bodies are different. So I think. There's something beautiful in that, personally. Yeah,
for sure. You had mentioned time in terms of like the pursuit of perfection with time, and somebody's being billed for this car. When you're doing something like this, how would you charge in that respect? Because I mean, this is custom work, but also too, they still have to pay the bill, right? So like, how does that work from the business case?
Yeah, I guess it's just really it's really working with the client and understanding what it is that they want. I think with I guess you got to use your morals a little bit as well. Like you got to look at it and go, oh, if I sit there and I file this thing for the next day and a half, how much better, you know what I mean? Like, is that going to be like, do I feel good about charging that customer an extra $1,400 or whatever it is just for that? And if I do that to every single panel, how much is it going to cost? Where that could have been a coat of high fill, and maybe, under a mil of filler or something like that. I think there's a real, I don't know, you just got to really sort of understand. You got to really just look at that and go, it's just not worth it. So for me personally, I don't file finish any of my stuff. I will focus on just getting the panel really nice off the tooling. As best as I possibly can off the tooling, and no high spots and highlight lines and things like that in the right spot. I'll weld them together. I'll address my weld area, and I'll usually just give it a brush or a orbital sand just in that area. Feel it, check for highs and lows. Use tools to sort of see, you run a a stiff sort of we call them, I don't know if you heard of them, they're called splines. They're like
Yeah.
they use them a lot in like clay modeling and stuff like that. They
Yep.
use them in bodywork as well. So you can sort of
Yep.
run that over the surface, see how if the surface is sort of flowing nice. You might see like, small little highs and lows. If they're anything too big, you adjust that just by hand, and then you
Hmm.
kind of just leave it. You know that it's going to go into bodywork. It's going to have a little bit of filler. It's going to have a little bit of like high fill over the body, but that saves so much time,
Yeah.
and that means money. So it's really just trying to find that point. Obviously, if you get a customer that goes, no, I want this thing file finished, I'll file finish it, but I'm also going to say to them, mate, it's not going to be perfect. If you want to file finish it, you're actually going to be less perfect if you go and you're going to try and move in and put body filler and all that sort of stuff in it. So,
Hmm.
yeah, it is definitely hard to sort of manage that expectation, but you just got to, I don't know, you just got to work within yourself to go, no, like I'm happy with that. And for me, I try and work off like a low spot or a high spot. Sorry, like a low spot in a panel, you can feel a low spot.
Yeah.
You can't correct highlight. Like if a highlight line is really bad, you're going to struggle to correct that in body filler or something, right? So like I really
Mhm.
focus on those important areas of the car, and so like so if I have a couple of bits in my panel that are a little bit wavy, it's like that's okay. That's going to be able to be corrected. But if I have a highlight line that's got like a big whoop in it, that's going to be very hard to feel, especially if it's high. So yeah, you're
Yeah.
trying to break down that sort of stuff and sort of say, where can I get the most benefit? Yeah, it's trying to just find that balance.
Yeah. In terms of, if we go back to the front guard, rear guard type of analogy, how long would something like a front fender take you from an early 30s car to actually build? And what would a customer potentially pay for something like that, assuming they can't buy it off of Amazon or eBay or something?
Yeah, well, that's the problem with this stuff. It gets so expensive. Is like,
Yeah.
well, say you have a week. Say you have a week building the guard. I don't know if that's exactly how long it would take, but say you got a week building it. That's going to
Mm.
cost the customer $6,000+, to do
Yep.
that. So, and yeah, it's hard. Like, I don't know, it's kind of hard to justify, but it's also too like, well, go and buy that. If you can't buy it, how much
Yeah.
does something cost? So
Yeah.
it's very, what I mean, like it's very hard to price, and sometimes it's very hard to them understand. Like I've had people call me in the past and they're like, oh, I need you to make me a bonnet for my hot rod, and I'll be like, yeah, great, it's not going to be cheap. And they're like, oh, okay, that's all right. And they come in and they go, oh, what do you reckon? I was like, oh, it's probably going to be 30 hours. Say that costs 4.5 grand. And they're like, oh, I can buy one for $900. I was like, I know, go do that. Like, it's not, I said it wasn't going to be cheap, so
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it is very tough to sort of manage that. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard in the past, if you can buy it, buy it. If you can't, then go from there. But I mean, yeah, if you can buy a stamped out panel for, as you say, $900 or $500, or you
Yeah.
can buy a door already fabricated, I mean, that would generally make more sense. But if you can't, hey, it's probably a special car.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And what else are you going to do? It's either you either want it or you don't, it's,
Yeah.
so if you want it, you got to pay for it. If you don't, yeah.
Yeah. So as we wrap this down, I just want to thank you so much for being on the show. I can tell your genuine sincerity for your business, and also too for the industry. Like you clearly have a passion here, and it really shows through. So from me to you, and on this
Thank
side
you.
of the mic, all the way over here from Canada, all the way
Yeah,
down to
yeah.
Australia. Thanks so much for being on the show. Where can people find out more about you, and how can they get in touch?
So yeah, Instagram, Facebook, Bespoke Coachworks, and YouTube, Bespoke Coachworks. I've just started, sort of ever since Carl come over. I've been getting into doing the YouTube, and I've been consistent with it, which is good. So I've got like a backlog of sort of 3 or 4 weeks, which is nice. So really trying to grow that and try and spread as much information as I can. I'm not perfect and I don't know everything by all means, but I'm definitely trying to share as much as I can and try and help wherever I can. I'm always open to talking to people, through social media and things like that, trying to, help with tooling or just questions that they may have. So, yeah, reach out to me there.
Very cool. All right, that's it. Thanks for checking out the Sheet Metal Shaping podcast. Don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe on YouTube and on Instagram. You can find the podcast on YouTube at Sheet Metal Shaping, and on Instagram also at Sheet Metal Shaping. We will see you on the next episode.